Daniel fails to dismantle atheism. This is Matthew, and in this episode of Still Unbelievable, I'll be reviewing another conversion story. This one features Daniel, who is known as Darwin to Jesus on that hive of shittiness formerly known as Twitter. Daniel's takes on matters of religion and atheism are bad. So bad that there are many who actually think he's a troll parodying the worst of religion. My confidence that he is a real Christian is about 90%. The 10% in reserve is because there are times I do wonder if he is a very clever troll. The main reason I think he isn't is because I don't think a troll could keep it up for as long as he has. Therefore I'm inclined to believe he's the real deal, which makes the things he says worthy of my special brand of sarcastic retort, which I will be employing by the bucket in this episode. Because the things Daniel says are genuinely pathetic, and any Christian who gives his stupidity a platform deserves ridicule. The episode I am responding to is link 1 in the show notes, and is from the podcast Ex-skeptic. Yes, there really is a podcast called Ex-skeptic, featuring versions of Christianity that actually celebrate turning away from skeptical thought. It's as though they are no longer ashamed of unreasonable credulity. If I wasn't so busy rolling my eyes, I'd actually find time to pity these.
I pity the fool goes home crying to his mama.
With that done, let's get on with this shit show.
In our story today, former atheist Daniel was seeking substantive answers to his looming questions that simple faith did not seem to provide.
That's the voice of Jana Harmon, the host of the Ex-skeptic podcast introducing Daniel. And yes, you really did hear her refer to atheism as simple faith. The dumbness really does start before the opening jingle has finished.
Daniel is a bold and winsome advocate for Jesus Christ with a strong online presence on Twitter, X, as Darwin to Jesus, where he thoughtfully engages with those who reject belief in God.
I really should have dug out a laugh or a groan sound effect for that, but I don't want to overuse them. No, Daniel is not thoughtful. Anybody who's read any of his tweets will realise that he is not thoughtful. Thoughtful is the last thing that Daniel ever could be.
But you'll also hear his wise and practical advice to both...
No, I give up. I just can't take it anymore. Laugh sound effect engaged already. I'm sure there'll be more.
Welcome to the Ex-skeptic podcast, Daniel. It's great to have you with me today.
It's such a great honor to be here with you, Jana, and so wonderful to meet you.
As we're getting started, I'd love for the listeners to know a little bit about you.
I am a Christian. I am passionate about Christianity and about my relationship with Jesus Christ. And I am a former atheist. I consider myself to have been a lifelong atheist. And right now, one of the things I primarily do, I have a Twitter account named Darwin to Jesus. And I'm trying to outreach to atheists, and I'm challenging them. And a lot of them may not like me, and I felt the same way about apologists when I was an atheist, but I'm engaging with them, trying to have conversations with them.
90% of the posts on Daniel's Twitter feed are shitty memes. You don't start conversations with shitty memes. Here is one which is not a meme.
Most atheists are upset with God because they think they should have his job. That's why they complain so much about how the world is.
Daniel, you don't have conversations by posting things like that.
The idea is to lead them to Jesus Christ, lead them to the Savior. And one of the things I've started doing recently is Twitter Spaces, where it's basically an open chat room, and I invite an atheist in to come talk to me for about 2 hours, and we talk about my reasons for why I believe in God, and we talk about their reasons for why they don't believe in God.
And yet, having allegedly done that, he still fails utterly and miserably to accurately represent what atheism or atheists are. What a turd.
The whole point is just to create an atmosphere where it's not a debate, it's just a friendly conversation.
And yet Daniel utterly fails to do friendly on his actual Twitter feed. I've not been to one of those spaces. Maybe I will try and sit in on one. We'll see about that. But I'm not encouraged to, because Daniel is decidedly unfriendly.
In this day of tribalism and ethnic mentality, Daniel, it's so great that you have a place that is conducive to just congenial conversation.
Daniel's Twitter feed is not conducive to congenial conversation. Not at all. Go and have a look, Jenna. You'll see for yourself.
All right. Why don't you paint a picture for us? Because obviously that atheism didn't come out of nowhere. Let's find out a little bit about how you were raised and how you were raised to think about God, your world as a child.
Absolutely. So if you asked my mom and dad about me becoming an atheist, they would have said it absolutely came out of nowhere, because I was raised Christian. I was raised Pentecostal.
And there we have the seeds. Before Daniel took on the label atheist, he already had a foundation of fundamentalist Christianity. We'll see how his story builds, but I'm willing to bet that those seeds that he was indoctrinated with as a child will show in how he reports on his atheist phase.
And for anyone who doesn't know what that means, essentially Pentecostals are the ones that put their hands up in the air during the worship hour.
Only an hour? Fucking lightweight.
One of the things that my mom says, and I believe that it's true, but I don't remember this, is that I even got baptized when I was about 6 or 7 years old. She says I went to a Christian camp during the summer and got baptized there and came back and I was on fire for God.
I did a decade of leading on a Christian summer camp. Yeah, the pressure put on those kids, not good. Not good at all.
I have a terrible memory and I don't remember any of that. What I remember is always hating going to church.
I'll fool you, man. I didn't always enjoy church as a kid either. Still ended up on fire for God, though.
And my parents would make me go to church every Sunday. Unfortunately, my father called himself a Christian, and he did not act very much like a Christian. And I think that, looking back, that probably had a lot to do with some of the choices that I made in my life as far as how I felt about God and where I ended up going at certain points. Because I think that a father and how he represents Christ to his children is really going to affect their view of God. Because my father was abusive and he was intimidating and he was just not a kind man to myself or my mom or my brother or my sister, it really did not impress me that he called himself a Christian, because he was really just a hypocrite. And I was not impressed with Christianity as a result of that.
Interesting shifting of the blame there. My own dad could be a bit of a dick sometimes as well. I spent most of my teenage years not being impressed by him. Still stayed on fire for God, though. I can't blame him for leaving. Wasn't my dad's fault.
As I got older, there were questions when I was 10, 11, 12 about Christianity that I had, and I would ask these questions, and my mom and dad just couldn't answer them. I would ask questions about, things like, well, if God is all-knowing, then how is it that we have free will? Which is a good question, and I get asked that now. But
it is a good question, but I doubt that 10-year-olds come up with it. I think Daniel is misremembering his timeline here. I wouldn't be surprised if someone in their teens asked this, but in 20 years of running youth groups, including the aforementioned 10 years of summer camp, I never had this question from a pre-teen. But Daniel is prone to elevating his own importance, so this statement is on par for his ego.
It's a question that I would ask my mom, and she would say, you just have to have faith. And that started to really rub me the wrong way, because I started thinking to myself, well, people in India, children in India are raised in a different religion, and they probably have questions like I'm having questions. And what are they told? Are they told you just need to have faith? Because what they believe and what I believe are not the same thing. If I'm right, then they're wrong. And if they're right, then I'm wrong. So it seems like just have faith isn't really going to cut it. It seems like we need some way to know if what we believe is true.
I agree. Having faith isn't good enough. I need a reason to believe something is true. And something as important as what Christians claim needs a very convincing line of evidence.
Because if what they believe is true, I might be in big trouble. And if what I believe is true, then they're definitely in big trouble.
Yeah, because there's nothing quite as loving as a God that would destroy you for daring to believe the wrong thing.
If you have young children or teenagers, I would really encourage you to study apologetics and try to have answers.
Because there's nothing like a bit of post hoc rationalization of your unevidenced belief in order to aid in your indoctrination of young people who have not yet grasped the concept of critical thinking.
It should be able to hold up to scrutiny if it's true.
I agree. And that's why I look dimly on apologetics. I want evidence that can be tested, not arguments that lead to a predetermined conclusion.
About the age of 15 or 16, I went to church with my mom for the last time. We drove there and I got out of the car and I looked at my mom and I said, I'm not going in there. I'm going to walk home and you can't make me go to church. And I knew that it was true because I was bigger than her and she knew that it was true. And after that, I didn't go to church anymore. And once I stopped going to church, that's when I really started to get into atheism. Because before that, I was more just, I don't like to go to church and I don't think that Christianity is true. But when I stopped going to church, I started looking up atheist videos online and I started hearing arguments that were against Christianity. And a lot of those arguments I thought were really, really good.
Do you have any examples of those arguments, Daniel?
I grew up in the time where the four horsemen of atheism were very popular. So those horsemen were Harris, Hitchens, Dennett, and Dawkins. And my favorite of the four horsemen was Hitchens by far. I thought that he was just brilliant. I thought that he won all of the debates that he was in, which is funny because now when I go back and I listen to the debates that he did, he really didn't do very well at all. It was mostly rhetoric.
This is why I'm not a fan of the debate format. Yes, a well-formed argument does have the power to change someone's mind. But it's not as successful as we like to imagine. Debates are more successful at affirming what we already believe, especially if it is a belief with little evidential foundation. Daniel's view on the debate performance has changed to align with his beliefs. This is why I ask for a methodology for validating a belief. Arguments do not impress me.
I got really, really deep into atheism. I got really passionate about it. Started pushing back on my mom while I still lived there. Became even more of a terror to her because now I was asking questions, not in good faith, but to try to destroy her worldview, to destroy her faith, because I thought it was bad. Once you become the type of atheist that I was, you feel like you're smarter than pretty much everybody else.
And anyone familiar with Daniel's online presence on that Twitter website, he still gives off that vibe. It seems that this behaviour is inherent in Daniel's shitty personality.
You feel like you've figured out something that nobody else knows. You figured out that God isn't real. And everybody believes that God is real. So they're all wrong. Everybody's being duped, but you figured it out. So you're a lot smarter than everybody else because they're all being fooled and you figured out the truth.
That's all you, Daniel. The deconstruction groups that I'm a part of do not have that kind of personality in them.
And it's very much a superior way of thinking.
Lack of epistemic humility is definitely a Daniel problem.
I definitely thought of myself as being better than others, and I had very little empathy for other people.
And you still don't.
I thought that all of the world's problems came from religion, and I thought that we needed to destroy religion and usher in the great atheist utopia of reason.
Reason is certainly better than faith, but fundamentalist absolutist thinking is bad no matter what side holds it.
That's how a lot of atheists think.
Misrepresenting others is bad. Okay?
In my research, I found that to be a very prominent characteristic is a sense of intellectual superiority.
The research that Jana is referring to is a PhD that she's done on people deconstructing or deconverting. Maybe I should dig that out and have a read of it and see what she actually does say in it.
So you said that you were a passionate atheist for 4 to 5 years. What happened from there?
Well, I stayed pretty passionate after that, but at about the 4 to 5 year mark, something happened that really shook me up. This was 2012, and what I saw was the Bill Maher show, and it was Sam Harris was talking with Bill Maher. He was on a show, and he was talking to Ben Affleck. Sam Harris was saying, as rational atheists, we should be more against Muslims than we are against Christianity, because Muslims are way more conservative. They also believe in God, and they're committing terrorism all over the world, which Christians aren't doing.
See link at 2 for the video that Daniel is referring to. There is a very valid point here. Islam is a shitty religion. In the world today, Islam is responsible for more oppression and more harm than Christianity. The core tenets of some forms of Islam are far worse than the worst of Christianity. This is all true. Why don't I spend my time critiquing Islam? Because Islam is not part of my life or my culture. I have not spent any part of my life being harmed by Islam. Islam being crap does not mean that Christianity gets a pass. Christianity is still shit in places, and those aspects deserve critique. And because it is part of my life, I focus on what I know.
The next morning, after this had happened, about half of the atheists sided with Ben Affleck and not Sam Harris. And that really, really surprised me, because I thought that Sam Harris was obviously correct. To see them side with him really surprised me, because I thought that atheists were these enlightened beings like myself. We had figured out something no one else knew. We had seen through the veil. And yet, here are these atheists that don't even understand that Islam is more conservative than Christianity. So if you're going to be against Christianity for being conservative and religious, why would you be less against another religion that is more conservative and also religious and more violent? This was the beginning of a split in the atheist community.
I've not fact-checked this point by Daniel. Maybe he's right, or maybe he's overstated the response. For the sake of this commentary, I'm going to accept that he's being accurate, because it doesn't change the fact that Christianity is still deserving of critique, and still makes claims that are not evidence-based.
And the split was basically the true liberals, like I consider myself to be, versus the people that had gone off the deep end. And I didn't know what those people were doing, but I knew that they were wrong. It was something that really shook me up, and I started to ask questions, because I became a little bit unnerved about my atheism to see that.
Sorry, what? Some people failing to critique Islam deservedly made you question your commitment to atheism? Really? Is that how weak-minded you really are? Really? Okay.
The next thing that really kind of changed the way that I perceived all of this, because now I considered myself a classical liberal. There was this CrossFitter that I really respected. He was the #1 CrossFitter in the world, and his name was Rich Froning. He was just a really good sportsman, a man of character. He would help people when they finished. One day, I was watching a Netflix documentary about Rich Froning, and I saw that he was there with his family. And I was just thinking, what a great guy. I'd like to be like this guy someday. As I'm watching, he sits down with his family to eat. And what do? They prayed. And as soon as I saw him pray, I thought to myself, oh, he's just a stupid Christian. And I completely dismissed him. Out of my mind. I had no more respect for him in that moment. But then I thought, why am I dismissing him? If I were, say, deployed, right, would I want somebody like Rich Froning with me? Or would I want all the atheists that I know, that I'm used to talking with, that I'm used to dealing with? Would I trust any of them? Or would I rather have Rich Froning? And the answer was, obviously, I would prefer to have someone like Rich Froning.
Based on what? Because you saw him pray with his children over a meal? Or because you saw that his children like him? What do either of those two qualities have when it comes to being in service somewhere? Seems that there's an odd criteria going on here.
And I'm not saying every atheist is low character.
Sounds like you are, Daniel, and that's certainly the impression you give on your Twitter feed.
But pretty much every atheist that I knew was, and I knew quite a few.
Oh, that warm, comforting glow of good old-fashioned Christian humility.
And I think that that's pretty darn typical. When I would interact with them personally, or when it was just us atheists, the only things we would be talking about, or they would want to talk about, wasn't philosophy. It wasn't what was true. It was women, drugs, and other degenerate things that I don't really want to specify.
Sounds like it was the crowd that you were mixing with, Daniel, not atheists specifically.
So I did not have a very high opinion of my fellow atheists. And when I realized that Rich Froning was someone that I really looked up to and respected, it actually shifted the way that I thought about Christians. Because up until that point, I thought of them as the bad guys. But in that moment, when I realized that I'd rather have Rich Froning with me than 1,000 atheists, it really changed my window. The Overton window completely shifted in regards to Christianity and atheism and the way that I saw them. And it made me start to see Christianity as something that was important to our society.
Basically, Daniel is admitting here that he was mixing with questionable characters and he associated their behaviour with atheism specifically, and that he looked up to someone who turned out to be a Christian, and that caused his worldview to shift. That's probably not unusual. This is the power of personal witness, and if he'd been mixing with a more balanced group of people, he might have had a different response. Daniel doesn't give his age here, but given that he said he turned atheist in his teens and that this was about 5 years later, this would put him in his early 20s, which is basically the age when lads hang around with other lads and generally act like dicks. This isn't an atheism thing, it's a male thing.
If the atheists that I knew were going to become more popular, and if people like Rich Froning became less popular and eventually became extinct, well, what would a world of the atheists that I knew be like? It would be terrible.
Sure, a world with more shit people and less good people would be a terrible world. That's not to do with religion or atheism, though.
I would not want to live in that world.
But by being the really shitty Christian witness that you are, that is the world you're attempting to create.
And when you start to realize that, you start to think, well, I want to live in a world with Christians because these are the people that I can depend on.
When you compare a bunch of red-blooded, hijinxed 20-year-old American males with one individual adult with a family who turns out to be decent and then also a Christian, you're going to end up with a completely one-sided view, which is terribly inaccurate.
I want to live in a world with Rich Fronings.
I have no idea who Rich Froning is, but let's imagine that he is the decent chap that Daniel says he is. Great. That being true, yes, I want to live in a world where every man is that nice, that decent, that good, that respectable, that admirable. But that is not the world we live in, and it is certainly not the world that all Christians are like. Wow. Is that really what got him to convert to Christianity? Shit.
You had this negative view of Christians, but you met someone who countered that, who disrupted that negative stereotype that you had built in your mind. I love that.
Why, Jenna? Why do you love that? One decent person who happens to hold to a specific worldview is enough to adopt that worldview? Really? I've met nice Muslims. I have no intention whatsoever of becoming a Muslim. Why does one nice person make an entire worldview worthy of respect and adoption?
A lot of people don't recognize that the Christian worldview is really substantive and helped build our civil society.
Hundreds of years of social domination, introduction of slavery, oppression of those unwilling to conform, murdering those from other cultures, forced conversion. The list of shitty things that Christianity did in order to maintain itself as a dominating force is depressing.
A good witness can actually change the way that someone else views you.
That is true. And so is the opposite. So tell me, Daniel, why do so many atheists think that you're an absolute shit?
So I basically became a lot more conservative after that because I realized that these conservative values that Christians were in favor of were really the things that were keeping our society going.
Ah, so you swapped one type of dickishness for another type of dickishness. So maybe this guy who you think is so great isn't so great after all?
But I thought that what they believed still wasn't true. I didn't think that there was any good reason to believe in God. One of those reasons, the main reason why I didn't think that there was any good reason to believe in God was because I was calling myself an empiricist. And I said, I don't believe that God exists because I've never seen God. So you show me God, I'll believe in God. Until I'm able to perceive God, and until you give me sense data evidence, I'm not going to believe it.
Well, that almost sounds reasonable. The guy's saying he's looking for evidence, but he specified sense data. It's almost as though he doesn't realise that our senses can be manipulated, can be deceived. I wonder if he's sort of coming up with a way of excluding our senses and yet coming up with an objective, testable, reliable, validatable result.
That was my quote-unquote epistemology. I was saying I don't have any sensory evidence of God, so I don't believe in God. The next big thing that really kind of changed my views on things was that I talked to my cousin about why conservatives and liberals had these different ways of looking at the world. And he said, you need to read this book. And the book was The Righteous Mind.
See link at 3. The book The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt appears to be critically acclaimed and very well received, and it makes some fairly good points. But follow the link and read about it yourself.
So I went and I read the book, and the main next part of my story is I went into a chat room. There were a bunch of atheists in there, and I was just going to listen to what they had to say. And they were interested in talking to me because they hadn't seen me in there before. I started talking with them, and they wanted to ask me some questions and see if I was intelligent or not, I guess. Eventually, one of the topics that came up was morality. And I made it known that I thought that rape was wrong, something along those lines. And they said, well, what do you mean that rape is wrong? I said, it's wrong. It's immoral. And they said, like, actually wrong? Objectively wrong? And I said, yeah, of course. And they said, you really think that you can account for objective moral values and duties if there is no God? And I said, of course. But I hadn't really given it much thought. And they basically schooled me about morality. And they told me we really can't justify objective morality at all, because in order to justify objective morality, you need some type of actual objective goal giver. You need meaning. You need purpose. You need objective values like goodness and badness. So anyway, they kind of went through some of this stuff with me. I thought that they were completely wrong. I thought that atheism absolutely could account for objective moral values and duties. And I thought it was the most ridiculous thing in the world that they couldn't see that. And I was not about to say that morality was subjective, because to me, that has always been absolutely ridiculous. I've always known that there is such a thing as actual right and wrong. And I set out to prove them wrong, because I still thought that atheism was true, but I definitely did not think that morality was subjective. So I tried for about 2 to 3 years to figure out a way to account for objective moral values and duties without God from an atheist point of view. And the more I studied it, the more I realized that it's just not something that can really be done.
I have no idea what study Daniel did over those 2 years, or what he was looking for, but there are multiple excellent articles on objective secular morality. See link 4 for an example. There are good points to be made in the case for a godless objective morality. One example would be the case of cooperation within a group. In order for a group to work productively together, there must be an element of behavioural trust. Things like telling the truth, not trying to cheat others, general positive ethical behaviour. In other words, acting to a specific set of moral standards that is not explicitly written down. It is fair to call these objective in the sense that the group innately knows to abide by them, and no God is required for us to know what they are. It's anyone's guess why Daniel found it so hard to find this information. I expect that his formative upbringing in a Christian home was instrumental in his thinking here.
Atheists or atheism simply cannot account for objective moral values and duties.
Well, for starters, atheism doesn't pretend to explain this. For that, you need secular humanism, and that explains it very well. If Daniel is looking for the answer in atheism, he is doing it wrong.
And when I realized this, it really shook me, because I thought that atheism was true. But how can atheism be true if it can't account for other things that I think are just as true, like that rape is wrong or that murder is wrong and these types of things?
I know you don't need me to, but I'll repeat myself anyway. Atheism doesn't say any of those things. All it is a single position on a single question: is there a God? For everything else, there is secular humanism or another philosophy if you prefer. Anyone looking to atheism to answer those questions for them is simply looking in all the wrong places.
And just for clarity, you're not saying that people who don't believe in God can't know what is good, they just can't find a basis for that, right?
Essentially, yes.
Wrong.
If there is no God, then goodness and badness don't exist.
Wrong.
So I'm not saying that if you don't believe in God, you can't be a good person. I'm saying that if God doesn't exist, there's no such thing as good or bad people.
Wrong.
There's no such thing as how we ought to
Wrong.
be. If there is no God, then whatever I want to do, I can do.
Wrong.
And it just is what I'm doing. There's no value about
Wrong.
it. And a lot of atheists, like you said, do misunderstand this argument.
Oh, we understand it. You're just
Wrong.
And it's your failure to understand how there is morality beyond your God.
And they think that you're saying that atheists are just bad and immoral people because they don't believe in God. And that's not what I'm arguing. I'm saying that the existence of goodness and badness cannot exist unless God exists. These things are...
The problem for Daniel here, and all theists that make a similar claim, is that goodness and badness do not exist. Good and bad, evil, righteousness, whatever you want to say, they are just labels that we use to describe something that we agree with or don't agree with. They don't exist as entities. There isn't a goodness entity floating around in the universe that touches us and helps us to behave. It's just a label that we give about things that we like.
This threw me for a loop, and it made me start to look at atheism differently than I had before, in another very significant way. Because before I looked at atheists differently, but now I was looking at the atheism itself, the idea that there is no God, differently. And I was realizing that there were entailments to this worldview, that there were consequences to it. And I had never realized that before. I had never realized that there were consequences to my worldview, and that I had a worldview. And once I realized that, atheism can't get me objective morality.
Because it doesn't attempt to. If you're going to look for answers in atheism that atheism doesn't even promise, then you are going to be disappointed. But that's not the fault of atheism. That's the fault of you and your expectations.
And that's absurd. It made me start to question what else atheism couldn't get me.
Nothing. There's nothing it can get you. Because atheism is a single response to a single question. Do I believe there is a God? No. Great. I'm atheist. That does not give me anything else, not anything philosophical, not anything scientific, because that is not what it's meant to do, numbskull.
Are there things that I'm believing as an atheist that I really have no right to believe in?
As an atheist, I believe that PC is better than Mac. Oh no, the world has ended!
And so I started to actually critically look at my beliefs as an atheist.
We should all be prepared to critically examine the things that we believe.
I was an empiricist. I needed you to show me whatever you wanted me to believe in. I'm saying it's logical to use my senses in order to perceive the world. And if I don't perceive something in the world, I shouldn't believe in it.
It's not quite that simple. It's not limited just to our senses. Experimental data is very important when it comes to scientific progress and having evidence of the existence of things. We can't see, touch or feel a black hole, but there is other sensory and evidential data that we can use to determine that they exist.
That's appealing to logic, right? That's a form of argument right there.
If you say so. But I'm getting the tingly senses that there's a straw man approaching.
So I clearly must believe that logic exists.
Exists as what? You can't detect it using any of your senses. So how do you believe that logic exists? What form does it take, Daniel?
I had never seen logic. I'm appealing to it. There are 3 laws of logic.
As defined by humans.
I believed that they existed, and yet I had never held any of these laws in my hand. So these laws that I believed in, that I was appealing to, they didn't exist in a material way. And yet, here I was calling myself a materialist.
Materialist or empiricist?
Well, what do materialists believe? They believe that everything is made of matter.
Or is dependent on matter. Thinking isn't matter, but thinking requires matter.
Well, if I believe that everything is made of matter,
you'd be an idiot, or you'd be lying about your past beliefs.
Then why am I believing in something that isn't made of matter? That doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. And it is very much a you problem, Daniel.
So what should I do?
Stop talking, turn off your computer, and go home to your mother.
And it wasn't just the laws of logic. I mean, numbers also are not made of matter. And yet I believe that the number 7 exists.
Oh no, there's a number 7. Help, that means atheism is false. Fucking hell, could this guy get any more dim?
So you've got a lot of different types of things that are immaterial and that I believed in.
Welcome to being a grown-up, Daniel. None of that validates your stupid mythological belief.
So it was at this point that I went into Discord to talk to an atheist friend of mine. I brought these problems up to him and I said, hey, if we're atheists and we're empiricists and we're materialists, why are we believing in things like laws of logic? Why are we believing in things like numbers?
Seriously, this is so dumb it's beyond laughable. It's things like this that make others think that Daniel is a troll, seeing how far he can push Christian stupidity until it cracks. Either way, Jana should know better than to allow this sort of bullshit to fly without pushback. When a genuine Christian like Jana allows this level of idiocy to go unchecked, then she kills her own credibility. Not that she really had any with a podcast name like Ex-skeptic, but you get my point.
And what he said to me, I will never forget as long as I live. He said, if you keep asking questions like this, you will not be an atheist much longer.
Yeah, the friend was right. You ask dumb questions like that, you're going to open yourself up to any really stupid belief.
I was really taken aback by that and very, very disappointed.
What else did your friend say, Daniel? Did he put you right on the stupidity of your question? Or have you failed to tell us the rest of the conversation?
I mean, now that I think about it, I felt a lot like I had when my mom would answer questions that I had about Christianity. You know, you just have to have faith. Well, he's saying, stop asking these questions, basically.
Right.
Really, I'm going to call bullshit on this one. Because Daniel's history of misrepresentation and outright lies on his social media tells me that I should not trust his reporting of this conversation.
That just made me want to ask more questions. I've always wanted to know what the truth was.
And so did all the people who left Christianity. Because after being tested, Christianity failed.
So when he said, you're asking good questions and you should stop.
Sticking my neck out, what was probably said was, you're asking the wrong questions. Because atheism does not say anything to those questions.
That made me want to ask even more questions. And so that's what I did.
Asking more questions is not in itself a bad thing. In fact, I highly encourage it. But if you're seeking answers from a source that is not equipped to give those answers, or is not designed to give those answers, then you're looking for answers in the wrong places. And one of the things that Christianity is especially good at is making up bullshit answers for areas where it really has no business. So if confidence in answers is what you're looking for, Christianity might be the place for you, but it is not a source of truth.
I guess the next really big thing, and this was probably the biggest thing that really showed me that I was wrong and that atheism was not true, was the problem of knowledge.
I have a very bad feeling about this.
Atheism leads to a contradiction.
Wrong.
Because atheism cannot account for any knowledge whatsoever.
When you spend your time looking for answers in the wrong places, the only thing you're going to find is disappointment.
When I say knowledge, I mean a belief that is true and that we have a justification for.
And since atheism is simply the answer to a single question about belief in God, and it is actually science and the methodologies behind it that give us justifications, Daniel's been looking in the wrong places. No wonder he's confused, messed up, fucked up, and downright stupid.
The reason why atheists cannot account for knowledge is because they have to start with themselves.
Wait, are you critiquing atheism or atheists? Because atheists account for knowledge by, as I mentioned earlier, the scientific method and all the philosophies surrounding it.
Because there is no transcendent mind in their belief system. So in their belief system, any truth has to come to them via whatever resources they just are made with.
Which is true of everybody who has ever existed, including yourself, Daniel. Though resources we are made with is a little bit of a weird way to phrase things, because humans have got their own ingenuity. Humans have created a methodology, we call it science, which helps us to test and validate and confirm things. And that is what is the basis of all the knowledge that we have.
This is what we have to use. When it comes to knowledge, you need to have actual justification.
Yes, that is why science exists, Daniel.
And if there is no God, I don't believe that you can justify any belief whatsoever.
And that is why you're as thick as shit, numbskull.
Let's say you said, I know this. And I said, okay, well, how do you know that? And you say, well, because of this. And you're gonna list another belief under that belief, right? Every time we say we have a belief, it's supported by other beliefs that we have under it.
This guy sounds like he's been listening to Seitan Bruggencate sermons on repeat. If you don't know who I'm referring to, don't bother looking him up. You're better off not knowing. He's not worth your time. Daniel is trying to make a case for a regress of layered belief, where every belief sits on top of another, and the only way to make it stop is by having something that was always there. In this case, the Christian God. This appeal doesn't work because as soon as you get to a methodology of testing things, the regress halts. We know that gravity works consistently because every time we test it, it behaves in exactly the same way. We don't need infinite layered beliefs to get there, and we certainly don't need to believe in a God. Daniel's complaint is anti-intellectual shitty apologetics, which frankly is all that Christianity offers.
And that keeps going down. And eventually you hit rock bottom. And the rock bottom that you hit is these unjustified assumptions.
And there's no worse unjustified assumption than an invisible God who refuses to show up.
So if you stack a belief on top of an unjustified assumption, well, that belief isn't justified.
And the scientific method exists to get rid of that unjustification, Daniel. Use it. Fucking hell.
And all of our beliefs are stacked on these unjustified assumptions.
Wrong.
Which means none of our beliefs are justified.
Wrong.
And if none of our beliefs are justified, that means we don't have any justification, and therefore we have no knowledge.
Wrong.
Because knowledge is justified, true belief.
We should call this pretzel apologetics.
If we are starting from ourselves, if there is no God, then knowledge becomes impossible.
Wrong.
However, that creates another problem. To say that I know nothing or I can't know anything, those are actually knowledge claims.
Right.
And that's a contradiction.
And that's definitely a you problem, Daniel.
That's like saying the truth is that there is no truth.
The truth is, there is no truth in any of what Daniel says.
It's a truth statement itself. It's a contradiction.
A contradiction that exists in Daniel's mind because of Daniel's twisted thinking. It doesn't exist in the real world.
And that's a huge problem. Because if atheism cannot know anything, then that means that atheism is a contradiction.
And because I like repeating myself, Atheism does not make these claims, so Daniel's complaint is bogus.
If atheism leads to this contradiction, well then...
But it doesn't.
Atheism is false.
And because atheism is a single answer to a single question, it is not a true false belief or a true false methodology or a true false philosophy. It's an answer on a personal level. Do you believe in a God? No, I don't. You cannot parse that to be true or false.
Any knowledge entails necessarily an all-knowing being.
Wrong.
If any knowledge exists anywhere, then an all-knowing being must exist,
Wrong.
and that all-knowing being must be the source of how we have any knowledge at all.
Wrong.
If we have knowledge, then that means that an all-knowing being must necessarily exist.
Wrong.
Once I understood this about atheism and that it actually just leads to a contradiction,
It doesn't.
well, then I realized that atheism was just absurd and that God existed. I knew that if God existed, he must be good, right? Because I believed in objective morality still. I didn't believe that morality was subjective. So if God does exist and he's the source of objective morality and I care about morality, well, then shouldn't I be serving God? And didn't he make me? So if he's really someone that exists and made me, then shouldn't I be on his side? Shouldn't I be serving him? To me, it seems like the answer was, of course, yes, I should be. And I talked to my mom about this, and she had been praying for me. She was so excited. She said, why don't you just get down on your knees and pray to him now? And I said, well, I don't want to yet, Mom. Because the truth was that I wanted to sin more.
And just when you thought it couldn't get any more weird, it just did.
Something that we all kind of understand intuitively, I think, is that to become a Christian really is a form of death.
And this kind of language is exactly why I consider Christianity to be a bad faith, manipulative religion that is actually a cause of poor mental well-being.
The person that you are is no longer there when you surrender to God. You're no longer your own boss.
No, you're no longer your own boss. You become a slave to the religion, or more accurately, a slave to the teaching of the church which you attend.
And it makes sense to me why so many people hesitate, because that's what I did. I hesitated. I waited 3 months after this. 3 months of sin. And I wouldn't have put it that way, but that's what it really was.
So not only can you not do atheism right, you can't do Christianity right. You're just one great big shit-headed failure, aren't you, Daniel?
Eventually, I got down on my knees and I prayed for the first time. And I said, God, I know that if you exist and you do, then you're good. And if you're good, then I want to serve you. I want to give you my life.
Because a good God wants nothing more than sycophantic worship mongers constantly telling it how great it is and begging to do what it wants them to do.
It was a pretty simple prayer, but it was a heartfelt prayer. And I meant every word. And it was nighttime. And I looked up at the stars and I just remember thinking, I've always known that God is real. I've always known that he existed. I've just been suppressing the truth.
Those that have seen Daniel's social media posts on atheism will already know that a constant theme of his is the bogus claim that there are no real atheists. That they all know that God exists and that they just want to sin and suppress their knowledge of God. Now we know why he says that. He is projecting his own bad reasoning onto others. He can't possibly imagine that others will have a different thought process to him or have different conclusions to him. He judges everyone who disagrees with him through the lens of his own inadequacy. He was clearly a dick while claiming to be atheist, and he is still a dick now.
And then after that, about 2 weeks after that, maybe a month, I don't know, I heard the gospel about what Jesus Christ had done for us, how
I'll spare you his tedious gospel revelation. You don't need to hear it.
I didn't care about people. I was still a total narcissist, had no empathy for anybody. And now I care about people. I even care about my enemies.
Really? Do you actually mean that? Because the things that you say on social media do not give that impression. So if this is nice Daniel, wow, Dick Daniel must have been a proper A proper bell end, that's what.
I mean, just Jesus Christ has changed my life completely, inside out.
Not seeing it. Really, really not seeing it.
One can't help but be impressed with it's been such a thorough transformation. Mind, your heart, the way you live, the way you think.
Oh, come on, Jana, you can do better than that. Ask some pointed questions. You're supposed to be an interviewer, not a worshipper.
How would you encourage someone to take a next step forward, to perhaps peer more closely at their own underlying presumptions, about what they believe, why they believe it, how they can ground it, and whether there's something more?
Well, it's difficult because most people, I believe, what they believe is not based on reasons.
Does that include you, Daniel? Are you most people?
Most people, what they believe is based on what they want to be true.
Are you most people, Daniel?
And then they supplement their desire for what they want to be true with reasons on top of it.
Spoken like you was trained by an apologist.
And of course, people don't tell you that this is what they're doing, but it is what most people are doing.
What a fantastic example of projection.
Do you really care about what's true?
Yes, that's why I do this.
Do you care about what's true no matter what?
Still yes.
Because if you seek for the truth, I believe that you'll find the truth. That's what Jesus said.
And the truth set me free. Free from Christianity. Oh, look, a rhyme.
And I follow Jesus, and he said, seek and ye shall find. And don't give up.
Really, Daniel? Don't give up? Exactly how long should we wait for God to fail to live up to his promises? Really? How long before it's reasonable to give up?
I sought the truth, and it took me years to figure out that Christianity was true.
And for even more people, it takes them years to figure out that Christianity is not only not true, but actively harmful.
But the most important thing that we can do in this life is figure out why we're here.
It's a great big cosmic accident. Deal with it. Now move on and have fun.
Why are you here? That is the most important question that we can ask. And there is an answer to it. And if you're not diligently pursuing that answer...
Who gets to define who's doing the right kind of diligent work, hey, Daniel? Who is it? You're going to pull a Dale Glover and insist that you're the one who gets to decide whether or not somebody's being a true seeker.
So, do you care about what's true?
Yes.
And if you do, seek it.
We did.
Look into the evidence for God.
Hello? We did. That's why we're where we are.
And that's why I'm so patient with atheists, because you just never know what is going to affect somebody.
Oh boy. Daniel, your Twitter feed does not reflect what you just said. What a numbskull.
To any Christian out there that feels discouraged because they talk to people and it seems like the people just don't listen, don't give up.
To any Christian who has the unfortunate instance of having to listen to this, well, congratulations on getting this far. But before you even try to convince me of anything, first try to understand where I am. Because if you fail to understand where I am, I will not listen to you trying to tell me where you are.
You are someone who actually engages, obviously, with atheists all the time. You mentioned that at the very beginning, especially in your Twitter spaces.
Point of note, Daniel does not engage on his Twitter. Maybe on his Twitter spaces, but I doubt very much. He talks at atheists. He tells atheists what they think based on his shitty experience, but he does not accurately represent what the run-of-the-mill atheist believes. He does not accurately represent what the atheists that interact with him actually hold to or believe. And Daniel is not a good faith communicator. Everything that he says about other people is utter bullshit. It's projection of his own shitty personality and shitty place. Daniel is not a good faith actor. So whatever he says next to this question, disregard it.
Is there any other advice that you can give us as Christians as to how to engage?
I would just say that unbelief is a matter of the heart. It's not a matter of the mind. So even though I care deeply about all of the reasons that I have for why I'm a Christian, and I do share those reasons quite often with atheists, my ultimate goal is to get to know these atheists and to become friends with them.
I am absolutely not motivated to have any level of friendship with Daniel.
Because that is really where we need to be as Christians. It's not going to be an argument. It's going to be a friendship that changes someone's mind.
There is very definitely some truth to this. In all my time as a Christian, the most effective way I saw of people coming into youth groups, or even as adults coming to church and eventually becoming Christians, was through friendship. I don't think I ever saw somebody convert through an argument or through evidence, but I did see a lot of people convert through patient friendship. They had friends who were Christians, they came along because of those friends, and they eventually converted because of that peer pressure, so to speak, or friendship pressure, if you prefer to use that as an expression. Friendship evangelism is a thing, and it works. People will convert to Christianity for their friends, to maintain a friendship, and sometimes even, yes, for romantic satisfaction. There is such a thing as a titties conversion, as well as friendship conversion. Evidence? Arguments? Like Daniel just said, tend to not work, which makes you wonder why Daniel does what he does on that Twitter place, because it is not friendship making that he does there.
It's going to be you caring about that person, even though they disagree with you. We can disagree about something and still care about that person.
Thousands of broken marriages as a result of one partner deconverting would disagree with that.
The most important thing is to be patient and to pursue friendships with people that you don't agree with.
Hey Christian, if you want to be friends with me, by all means, let's be friends. But if you try to evangelize me, I will counter-evangelize you. Let's have a fight over it.
Hopefully I can be a good witness.
Bad news, Daniel. You're not.
There's no doubt in my mind, Daniel, that your life is making a difference.
Yep, but not in the direction you think, Jana. Daniel, you are actively turning people away from Christianity. Well done.
So you are a beautiful ambassador for Christ.
Really? Are you absolutely sure about that?
So thank you so much for coming on. I just so appreciate you.
Well, it was an absolute pleasure and honor to be here and get to share my testimony. And I hope that it can benefit someone out there.
Well, it certainly benefited me, Daniel, but in ways that you would rather not realize.
Because I know what it's like to not believe. And it's awful. It's terrible. You have no hope. Death is looming over you.
Wow, you are totally not explaining, not describing, not comprehending anything that I or my fellow atheists experience. I pity you.
Thanks for having me, Jana.
Thanks for tuning into the Ex-skeptic podcast to hear Daniel's story.
Some thoughts for those who have made it this far. This podcast did not shift my lingering doubts over Daniel being a genuine believer. That residual 10% hesitancy still exists. For someone who claims in his ex-bio to be a lifelong atheist who converted, Daniel's story does not match that claim, and his justifications are essentially wishful thinking. Daniel's insistence on projecting his faults onto atheists is tedious, and that he thinks he is engaging with atheists thoughtfully is downright laughable in its fatuousness. This is genuinely the most intense self-delusion I have ever seen. Which is why there is still some part of me that thinks Daniel is really a troll. I'd be interested to know what you think. So until next time, be reasonable. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.